Hello everyone, in the following video we have a video premiere of my new playlist, which will be about DSP audio software that I invented myself, self-made VST plugins that I made myself, which I'm very proud of, even though I'm the biggest noob on earth. And that's also the thing that will make this series of videos so special, because most of the people that upload videos of them coding or even making VST plugins from scratch or something are very advanced. Even the low-level stuff seems very advanced to me, and these videos will not be very advanced. They will be more practically focused. So first of all, here's the plugin that we will look at today. Kehrwert VST. I made it and it makes this up sound like this. So it's kind of a distortion plugin, but yeah, it could also be used in other ways. I don't think it fits into any category perfectly. It's also some kind of modulation plugin if you want it, and it looks like this. It does not have a GUI because I didn't spend any time figuring out how to make GUIs yet, even though I have cool ideas for GUIs. For now I will just use GUI-less plugins, and you can download this free plugin. It's for Windows and Mac, 64-bit and 32-bit, so everyone can use it. VST2, yeah, it's available for everyone. And now I think I will just start a new synthesizer and just show you all the controls in the plugin. And after that we will go into the into the code and look at how cool it is to code VST plugins like that. So now we have a sine wave at C1. It's pretty deep. Cool. Maybe it's a little bit too loud. Okay. Now we put our plugin there, Kehrwert, and now we also put an oscilloscope there, so we can watch what happens. For now I will turn it off, because first of all we will set up the oscilloscope in a way that it makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. The oscilloscope plugin is a little bit weird. Sometimes you have to move around in these things until things finally start being there where you would expect them to be. Okay. Cool. So now we have our sine wave shown here, and now we can see what the plugin has. It has 3 different modes, a polarity flip switch. You can see what it does, because it only does flip the polarity for the mixed signal. A squeeze in the limit button, which also only does something when the mix knob is somewhere, and an overall gain control, and with also only does something when mix is turned up, and that's why we will turn mix up to 100% now. Now we can see what the plugin does. It kinda squeezes waves. At least that's what it does in mode number 1. Then there's the second mode. And the third mode. So as you can see, even on a simple sine wave, you can create very large amounts of different timbres with it. And now I will use another wave just so you see that all other waves also make sense, kind of. And now you also see why I call this a modulation plugin and not just distortion, because imagine you would use an automation on this and it would sound like this. Okay, now we have listened enough to this plugin. Oh, I just see it seems to have a bug that causes the plugin to have some kind of wave when nothing is being played in mode number 1. Okay, I have to address that later. But for now, we will just look at the plugin, what it does, and then we will listen to this song and see where the plugin was used in this beat. First of all, I will spoiler you with one part from the beat. Okay, cool. Now let's start with the fun stuff. First of all, I made this plugin in plugin script from BlueCat Audio. That is a VST plugin that lets you write VST plugins, and it's pretty cool. I bought it some time ago. As you can see, it costs €100, and I think that's pretty affordable for a plugin that is so much fun. It makes scripting plugins much easier than using actual C++ and the Juice stuff, even though that's also considered easy compared to not using the Juice stuff at all. So as you can see, this makes it very easy, and the reason why this makes it so easier, you will see it in the code why that's the case. But I can really recommend this plugin for making plugins, especially because you can, in this plugin, you can export plugins to plugin formats, and other people don't need to have this plugin to use your plugins. That's pretty cool. and you can test your plugins directly in your DAW, and you don't have to export them from your compiler to test them, which is also pretty neat. Yeah, the idea behind my plugin was, I was looking at this graph, which is the, let me check for the word, the reciprocal, the inverse value of x. And that's why I called it Kehrwert, because that's German for this word. And I would use it Kehrwert in the future too, because I already forgot how the word was called. So yeah, let's pretend like there is a parameter a, which is like yeah, we can set a range here, let's say -7 to 7 in really small steps. And now we can say a times, oops, wrong. This must be directly at the x thing. Yeah, and now we can make an oscillation going on, and we can, somewhere was something about speeding it up. Yes, that's cool. So now it's sped up, and it looks like it's kind of bouncing towards each other in the diagonal quadrants, or whatever it's called in English, you know, and it looks pretty cool. And I thought, yeah, what if I use something like this as audio processor for stuff? And that's how the idea was born. Yeah, here's the code. So let's start at the beginning. The beginning of the CXX files, where you write your code, always starts with something like this, where you write which file it is and what it does. And there is the name, and there is another description what it does. And then there is this stuff, which tells something about the parameters that will show up on the screen. For example, you can put the names here, so the labels of the parameters. These words will show up under the parameters that you add to your plugin. Then there is input parameters enums, which lets you for parameters, let's say it like this. If there is a parameter that has a fixed number of values, like a switch or something, then you can say how the switches should be called. As you have probably seen, this word wasn't in my plugin, and both of the second, these are 3 modes, and in my plugin you can only see the words equal and modulus. That's because I think that the scripting language is not capable of understanding that a switch can have 3 words, and that's why it doesn't show the last one. But that's why I put the word 3 in the title, so people actually notice that there are 3 modes. That's a rough solution, but I don't know. Anyway, yeah, it's suitable for off and on stuff like I did for the polarity switch. Then there is an array double input parameters length. That's in every script. The plugin comes with presets, and of course you get inspired by the presets first before you do anything, and this is in every preset, and I don't know what it is for, but it seems to be important. Now, input parameters steps is how many steps do the parameters have that are using steps, like the modes and the polarity switch. Everything else has soft values. You know, like the squeeze thing is a parameter that has an unlimited amount of values almost, and it's not steppy, you know, and that's why it does not have steps. Input parameters default. This is supposed to make the plugin start with a default setting, but it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I don't know why. I haven't figured it out yet. Anyway, input parameters min and max is what's the minimum and maximum amount of value that a parameter is able to have, and it makes sense to set these to 0 and 1, because then 0 is off and 1 is on, and everything in between is something in between. Yeah, now here we initialize all the things. I don't know what they are called. You know, like double is a number with a lot of stuff behind the commata, and int is the stuff that has only values like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and bool is like it just says if something is true or false. And an array is an amount of stuff, and the words behind it says an amount of what kind of stuff. So this is an amount of double numbers. And these are the names of the stuff, and you can see there's a link between these names and these, because this will be what will modulate the mode. You see the modes. This is the label of the mode, and this will modulate the mode. Yeah. Let's skip this function. I implemented a bunch of functions here, and we start with the update input parameters once, since you already saw my input parameters. Not all parameters here are input parameters, but you will see that here are the input parameters. For example, what's the easiest example in this one? It's probably limit. Limit equals input parameters 3, and that's it. Input parameters 3 is the fourth input parameter because it starts at 0. 0, 1, 2, 3. 0, 1, 2, 3 is limit. That's true. And here is limit as well. And limit, and since we know that input parameters go from 0 to 1, that means limit goes from 0 to 1. So when you turn the knob, the limit knob, it goes from 0 to 1, unless I change anything about that. For example, the squeeze knob. I changed it for the squeeze knob because I multiplied it with 25, which means it goes from 0 to 25, and then I said plus 1, so it goes from 1 to 26. You know, I don't remember why I did that, but it probably made sense. So for some of the parameters, I had to write int and put the stuff behind in brackets, because input parameters is a double value, and you have to convert it to int to put it into an int. Oh, it's double thing. Okay, that's confusing. Maybe that's the reason why stuff isn't looking as I wish it is. Anyway, I should check for that later. Yeah. Okay. These are the input parameters, and here the behavior of the input parameters is defined, and that's pretty much all there is to say about that. Let's go on. Then we have an initialize function which doesn't do a lot. It just activates the function IOTempFlex, which is this function down here. IOTempFlex makes IOTemp react correctly to different amounts of audio input channels. Here there is IOTemp. IOTemp is an array of double values, and okay, I'm gonna spoiler you. There is something in this plugin, and in every plugin, that you do with this software, which is called IOSample, and that's also an array of doubles, and IOSample always contains the current sample where you are, so the current little piece of sound that you are about to process. It's always IOSample. And I created IOTemp to store IOSample in another value here before I do the processing stuff, because in the end I will use it again, but more about that later. And so IOTemp needs to know how many audio inputs count there are in the project, because some projects are mono and some are stereo, and maybe some are even surround. I don't know. It really depends on what the producer is trying to do, and I would like to do the things as generally usable as possible. So I created another value called A, and A is the amount of audio inputs. And then there is a while loop that says while A is still bigger than 0, the array called IOTemp gets a new value, and this value is 0. So it doesn't have any meaning that there's 0. It could be any value. 0 was just a reasonable choice. And at the end of the while loop, there is one. A minus minus means that A is subtracted from A. There was subtracted 1. So if A was 2, then after one loop, A is 1. And then the while loop asks A, are you bigger than 0? And A says, yeah. So the while loop starts again, and another 0 is added. Then A minus minus, and A now is 0, and the while loop asks, yo bro, are you like bigger than 0? And A says no, so the while loop ends. And now IOTemp contains two values, 0 and 0. These are just dummy values, so that IOTemp has the correct amount of values that now can be filled with stuff. So now we can actually go on with the most important function in which the magic happens. Process sample. Process sample starts with the for loop, and it basically is not anything more than just this for loop. This for loop says the following: it has an int value which starts at 0, and it says as long as this value is smaller than the amount of audio inputs, it should be added 1 to it. So that basically means, since it starts at 0 and in a stereo environment we have two audio inputs which are called 0 and 1, that the for loop will go through one time for the value 0, then start again for the value 1, and also go through for that value. And that are the left and the right channel. So the for loop goes through the whole for loop for each channel. Okay. The first thing that happens is that the current channels, what's in the current channel is put into IOTemp. Then the width control starts. You remember there was a width knob. Yeah, let me go on with the width later, because the width is really not the main feature of the plugin, as you have probably noticed. We should go on with the squeeze and stuff part. So here the current sample is being processed equals, and it's processed by a function called squeezer, which and this function asks for a double value. So I give it the current sample. Let's go to the function squeezer, and we see the function squeezer starts with putting the value that we gave him into a value called A, and it also creates a value B and the value W, but we will not look at the W value now, because it's just something about the width. Only A and B is important. So we can skip this stuff to okay, here it starts to be exciting. If A is not 0, that means we don't want that the current sample that is that was put into the value A be 0. And the reason for that is, you remember the Kehrwert of the function was this bouncing wave. And when you actually used 0 as a parameter for that, then that didn't work, because 1 through 0, 1 divided by 0 is actually, it doesn't work, it creates an error. You know that if you had math in school. So I said, no, it shouldn't be 0, and if it is not 0, then there's another if statement. If mode is 1, and then the next if statement is if mode is 2, and else can only be mode 3. The reason for that is that I have 3 different modes, and every mode does something different in the lines. The first mode puts into A a value, and that value is 1 divided by the amount that you, like, what was squeeze? Squeeze was one of our parameters, and that parameter is multiplied with A, and A is the sample that we give him. So this is basically just like what I showed you on the web page, and then it's divided by 10. I forgot why, but it probably makes sense. The second mode does almost the same. The only difference is, instead of saying A equals, it says A modulo equals. And the modulo operator is one that, how do I explain it? It's often used to check if a value divided by another value is I remember, is a decimal number or not, and if yes, then how much of a decimal number it is. But I don't use it to check stuff, I actually use it to process stuff, and I don't actually know what it does, but it does something fancy, as you have heard. And the last algorithm is one that also uses equal, but it uses the modulo operator instead of the divide operator here, and also something about the width. But as I said, we will look at that later. And then it says A is B minus A. The reason for that was that when I would put this stuff just into A, then there was some terrible DC offset going on, because the wave was only positive then for some reason. So I said A is equals B minus A. But I would encourage everyone who uses my plugin to actually use a high pass filter after my plugin if you use mode 3, because this doesn't fix the DC offset completely. It's just a nice little pseudo solution. Okay. I didn't want to add the high pass filter here. I could, but I think that's pretty CPU intensive. So I thought if people want to do that, they can do that themselves. I don't do that in my plugin. Yeah. What is this? Oh yeah, we had a polarity parameter that can be turned on or off, and this is pretty easy here. If polarity isn't on, alright, I remember polarity is 1 and 2, so if it isn't 1, then, oh wait, is it 1 and 2 or is it 0? Anyway, if the polarity switch is in the specific state, then the whole signal will be multiplied with -1 and therefore flipped. That's how polarity flips work. It's pretty easy. I always don't understand why so few plugin developers add a polarity switch in their plugins, because it's actually so easy to implement them and they are often so useful. But yeah, I don't know why they don't do that. Yeah, then we return a back to the other function. Let's go back to the other function. Where were we? We were here. So yeah, the value is returned after all the processing and is now stored in IOSample. Now IOSample is being processed by the limiter and also by the limit parameter that we can set. Because when I made the first mode, I noticed that especially because of the infinity stuff in the Kehrwert of X, there were very high values at sometimes, and I thought, okay, I need a limiter at this place. So I made a limiter, and the limiter takes the sample and a threshold value, and the threshold value is our limit knob. So if mode is 1, the limiter works. Wait up. Oh no, that's something different. This is something for the width. I guess. Or is it? Yeah, it has some width stuff, but let's just ignore the width stuff for now and let's just start from here. If sample is bigger than 1, I started doing the limiter without the threshold, and that was pretty easy. If sample is bigger than 1, or if sample is smaller than -1, then sample is 1 or -1. That was how it all started, and else it's just a sample and nothing else. But then I added the threshold thing and multiplied with threshold at these places. Yeah, except for if there's no 1 or -1, then it's not multiplied with a threshold, because then we just get this sample back. And then there's also some width stuff in here, but more about that later, because that's actually pretty complicated. Then if the sample, wait up, oh, this is if it's not mode 1, this is the code if it's mode 2 or 3, but it's actually the same as here, just without the width stuff, because I had some problems with designing a nice width, and then I had to do it in the limiter, because I usually did that in the squeezer function. But then I thought, okay, then I guess I use the limiter for that. I'm not limited to the squeezer function. Okay, then IOSample is multiplied with a limit knob, and the limit knob is multiplied with -1 plus 1. When I multiply things by -1 plus 1, then it's probably because the value goes from 0 to 1, and I wanted to go from 1 to 0, because 0 to 1 multiplied by -1 is 0 to -1. And if you put +1 to that, then it's not minus to then it's not 0 to -1, that because then it's 1 to 0. Okay, you know, so that's how you turn around the knob. And I think that was important here because the stuff was going too loud when the limit knob was turned up. So I guess I thought I have to compensate for that. This is some kind of gain compensation. So now we have even more gain stuff. The mix and the gain knob. And this is the mix knob. Yeah, first of all, here's the gain knob. It's pretty simple. It just multiplies the wave with the gain knob. Very simple. And here's the mix knob. The mix knob does two things, and these two things are connected with a plus. The first thing is it takes the current sample and multiplies it with a mix. Mix is a value that goes from 0 to 1, I guess. Yes. So the more you turn mix up, the more IO sample I exists. So if you turn mix completely down, there is no wet sample. Plus, and this is why I stored IO temp in the beginning, IO temp multiplied by mix. Yeah, and I turned around mix as I told you a little bit earlier. That way, when mix is, yeah, it's just the opposite, you know, and that's how a dry wet knob works. Don't have to explain it, I guess. You will figure it out if you try it yourself. Now we have the different modes, the polarity, the squeeze, the limit, the mix, the gain, and now the fun stuff, the weird stuff starts, the width. This is the first plugin ever in which I tried to make a width knob, and I didn't look into the presets about making stereo plugins. I just figured it out myself, and it probably works easier than I did it. I did it by adding a width knob where you can turn up the width from 0 to 1, I guess. Yeah, from 0 to 1. And a width check that is false by default. And this enables width, yeah, it checks if I is 0. So if I is 0, which means we are at the left channel, we are processing the left channel right now, then width check is false, and else width check is true. So my stereo plugin works by only processing the right channel differently than the left one. But what's the difference between the left and the right channel? Therefore, we have to go look at the squeezer function again. That's the stuff that I skipped earlier. And we see it has this value, W is 1 by default. If width check is false or the width is turned down to 0, so you don't want width anyway, then W is still 1. And the reason why the number 1 is used is because we use W to multiply stuff with it. And of course, when you don't want to change a thing when the width knob shouldn't do stuff, so it has to be multiplied with 1, because things that are multiplied by 1 don't change, as you know. So else, if it's not this stuff, then W is with plus 1. Wait up, why did I say plus 1? Yeah, I remember. I think it was because the width knob goes from 0 to 1. Yeah, and I wanted it to go from 1 to 2. Okay, so that it starts at 1 and goes up to 2. So when you turn up, it starts here and it just goes up from there. It doesn't suddenly start from 0. Yeah, that was the reason why I added 1. And it was stored into the value w from now on in this function. Yeah, so if blah blah blah, okay, the first mode does not have width in it. I had problems about that here. I couldn't find a cool place to put the w, so I didn't do it here. The second mode has the w as a multiplicator for the squeeze function, and it's multiplied by 2, so it goes from 1 to 4 actually. And in the third mode, it's just the w multiplicator at all and nothing else. Yeah, that was pretty easy. It was never so easy to make a nice width knob, but I had problems with first mode, and that's why I solved it in the limiter, where I said if it's the first mode, then we do a width check, and if the width check is true and the width is not 0, then we do this fancy stuff. And otherwise it goes into this stuff. Even if it's mode 1, it will go here if this all this stuff is not true. I just noticed that I could have put all this stuff into 1 if this stuff here could be just 1 line. Anyway, what does happen? Yeah, if the sample clips at 1, then it doesn't just return 1 times threshold. It does modulo with before, because that produced an interesting result. Else blah 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 blah, and the same for the negative kind of for the negative limiting. And what if the sample doesn't clip? Then still the same, but divided by the width. Wait up, why did I use width and not w here? Oh yeah, w was just the squeezer. I am confused. Yeah, divided by width. What the fuck? Okay, why did I do that here? Yeah, this is obviously a variation of what I told you earlier. It's I divided by 10 just to make the value smaller, but all in all it's the same. It's also multiplying stuff with -1. Oh no, it isn't. Okay, then I guess I tricked myself, but at least it works. So see also some width stuff. No. So I guess that was everything we can say about this plugin. Yeah, we went through the whole code, and that's the reason why I like BlueCat plugin script so much, because then you can actually code stuff pretty easily, and you have a very small amount of lines, and you can really get stuff going. And now we will listen to the song that I made, and then I will show you where I used the plugin and how it sounded before and after and stuff like that. Okay, let's go through the details. Okay. So what do we have here? The list of effects that were used. I seem to have not used it on drums, obviously, because it just fucks shit up completely on drums. Where did it start? Oh yeah, this is actually a plugin that I also made, Rectify. Maybe I will make another video about that. The thing is, I had these pads here. And I thought I must kind of make them more crunchy in the high end. And that's this parallel group, which sounds like this alone. And that's caused by my Rectify plugin. It's a plugin that it flips everything that is below 0, makes it positive, and then it does some other stuff, and it uses high pass filtering to put it back into the middle to so you don't have DC offset. And together with the pads, it creates some kind of glue effect. Yeah, it's kind of like a little bit more intense and breathing and stuff. Okay. So yeah, the pads have Rectify. Now the fun starts. The ARP. I already showed you the ARP in the beginning. It's a very fast sequence of notes and arpeggiator that are made in this lovely little synthesizer that many people probably know. And it sounds like this without any effects. Add the compressor back into it, and also the equalizer. It doesn't do a lot, as you can see, and also I used a little delay plugin to make it a little bit more trancey. But even if I didn't use delay, then my plugin would add a lot of stuff. So as you can see, it adds a lot of interesting harmonics. Okay, you also heard it. It wasn't necessary to prove it like that, but I thought you might have been interested in the texture of the sound, how it's optically visualized. So it adds some kind of glue to it, and it also makes it squeeze. That's why I called this knob squeeze, because it sounds a little bit like heavy compression, but as you have seen the algorithm and you know that it It doesn't have to do anything with compression, but it still sounds like OTT or something, like a new kind of OTT. And I almost used only the wet signal, just a little bit of the dry signal, and I kind of did something with these knobs. I did the middle mode. I used the middle mode for that because that sounds pretty good on percussive synths, I feel, because it kind of attenuates the dynamics, and the other modes kind of don't care about the dynamics and just crunch hard. And I didn't use the width because I felt like these amps should be centered a lot, except for the delay. The delay kind of gives it some room. So yeah, that's probably the best example for my plugin, and you can see that my plugin really helps putting some new glamour to these old synthesizers. If you like synth 1, then you probably know what I mean. I mean, it's great synth and everything, but it's really hard to make it sound modern. And yeah, then what do we have here? The bass line. Oh yeah, the bass line is actually Serum. And you know you can do a lot of stuff in Serum, so why would you need a crazy synthesizer plugin effect? The patch without effect sounds like this. So it's basically a saw wave and a sine wave. Everything is very clean, no randomized phase, and yeah, and even the envelope is matched to the tempo of the beat and everything. Yeah. And soft intro, soft outro, I mean attack and release. Yeah, so there's no clicks. Some pseudo mono by putting the polyphony to 2. Okay, it just doesn't go any cleaner. What I did then was using a filter automation to make it go up. And it will end up in a very bright state. And we will just stay in the bright state so you know what the plugin does. Here it is. So, as you can see, this time I used the third mode and some width this time, because in this example the width actually sounded nice, and I also added a little bit of chorus modulation to add even more depth and width. And this is just sidechain compression. Yeah, so this really changed the waveform from a simple saw wave to something else that sounds very fancy. Wow, damn. And that's also thickens up the part down here. Or more like makes it more complex. It doesn't get thicker, but it sounds more complex and rich. Now we have the background vocals. Yeah, I recorded some vocals. You probably don't even notice. I used Kehrwert to scale them to my scale. Very simple setting. Then I used Kehrwert on the third mode, and yeah, some settings, you know, 100% effect. And the cool thing was you can use this in while you are recording, and it sounds pretty cool, and it's a lot of fun, and it doesn't produce any latency. I was a little bit surprised. And some vibrato function, a lot of reverb, and an equalizer to make it sound more distant. Then we have these clave rhythm synthesizers. And both of them have Kehrwert. Let's turn it off. As you can see, that's pretty drastic, the difference. So this is, yeah, it was clear that it's the second mode, because the second mode sounds nice on percussive synth. Makes it nice and squeezy. And then there's the second synth that has more sustained sound. Yeah. Damn. So nice. Yeah, that's it for today.